Hey friends, it's Tori. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to give you my December wrap-up. In the month of December, I read 5 novels, 2 short stories, and 1 poetry memoir essay book. The first book that I read in the month of December was that I finally finished Dragon Mage, which is a giant indie fantasy book by M.L. Spencer. This book I started, I think, in October, so it took me a while to actually finish this book, and I finally did that in the first week of December, and it felt great. This book I had heard amazing things about. I know that it's a much beloved book within the fantasy community, and I can totally see why. There were some things plot-wise with this book that I really struggled with personally, but that being said, I can totally see why a lot of people absolutely love this. The amount of just wholesome vibes in this book. It is kind of a weird, I would say, genre borderline book where it's epic fantasy that kind of like puts a toe into the grimdark genre despite having young protagonists. Overall, I did really have a good time with this read. I think one of the things that M.L. Spencer did incredibly well in this book is the representation of a main character on the spectrum. And he was mostly throughout the book a really, really great character. I thought personally that she did a really good job with him, and it was nice to see just kind of a twist on the chosen one protagonist. In any case, yeah, finished this one finally. This was one that I was buddy reading with a friend of mine, and she hasn't quite finished it yet, but hopefully she will soon, and then I will be able to chat with her more about the story. This book is very classic fantasy vibes. It definitely goes for a lot of the tropes that we all know and love from classics, like the dragons, chosen one kind of thing, like the training up, having a mentor trope, all of that is in here. So if you're looking for a modern twist on some great classic fantasy tropes, I would highly recommend this book for you. The second book that I read in the month of December, I needed to take a swerve away from fantasy briefly just to avoid falling into a reading slump, and I picked up Shanghai Girls by Lisa C. This is my 3rd time reading Lisa C's work. She does amazing kind of full lifetime stories of women from different Asian cultures, and it's usually tied between Asia and America. So the 2 girls in this book are sisters who come over to America fleeing the Japanese invasion of their homeland. They're trying to make a life in the original Chinatowns in Los Angeles, California. It's very good. Lisa C. is one of my favorite non-fantasy authors. She has some beautiful writing. She does such a great job making you care so much about these characters over an entire lifetime of experiences. Shanghai Girls actually narrowed the scope a little bit, and it didn't follow as big of a timeline as the 2 previous books that I've read from her, which were Tea-Girl of Hummingbird Lane and Snowflower and the Secret Fan, both of which I highly recommend. This one is definitely 3rd out of my 3 that I've read from her so far. I didn't connect with the characters quite as much as I did in her other 2 books, but I have every intention on reading more of her work. I am a huge, huge fan of her novels, and I cannot wait to read the next one. After Shanghai Girls, I went back into the fantasy genre, but just for a tiny little taste, and I read Century Blade, which is a short story in Rob J. Hayes' Mortal Techniques series, which was one of my top reads of last year. Never Die and Pawn's Gambit were 2 books that I absolutely loved in 2022, and I just recently got the 3rd book, which is Spirits of Vengeance, and I cannot wait to read that. But I wanted to read Century Blade, which is a short story that kind of gives the origin of a character that we meet briefly in the story of Never Die. Century Blade is a really fun, very short story that is kind of like you're sitting down and someone's telling you a folk tale around a campfire kind of feel, but in an Asian-inspired fantasy world. It definitely added to the lore of the characters within the Mortal Techniques series. It didn't have the same depth that the novels did, obviously, because it's a short story, but I'm really glad I read it, and it's one more checkbox on me having read everything available in this series so far. After Century Blade, I went back outside of the fantasy genre and I picked up Let the Hurt Girl Speak by my friend Katie Andrews. This is kind of a essays slash poetry book of just her. It's almost a like early 20s coming of age feel. It's incredibly wholesome, and she had some fantastic insights into what it feels like growing into adulthood and all of the anxieties and stress and traumas that we go through during that time period. And she just has such a beautiful way with words. It's a cozy read, despite the fact that she's talking about really heavy topics, which is something that I really appreciated. And I'm always impressed by people who are brave enough to put their inner life and heart out onto pages like this and give us not just an insight into their fictional characters, but also an insight into them as a person. Next, I went back into fantasy and I read Legacy of the Brightwash by Crystal Matar. This book was a SPFBO finalist, making sure I get that acronym correct, from last year in 2021. Legacy of the Brightwash is a grimdark romance. We follow a main character called Tashue Blackwood, who is a regulation officer in a kingdom called the Domain. It has kind of a gas lamp feel to it, but the grimdark atmosphere is so well done in this book. One of the things that I think is a huge strength of Crystal Matar's is the fact that her dialogue and her character work is so strong. To me, that was a huge part of this book, and one of the things that I enjoyed the most about it. It's some of the best general character work, I think, as far as just ease of connection to the characters, if that makes sense. Her dialogue feels incredibly authentic, whether it's between friends who've known each other for ages, or it's kind of the awkward, subtly insulting, but in a compliment, that happens at political functions. This book also leans pretty heavily into the romance half of its subgenre as well. I'm usually really not a romance fan, but I found myself actually invested in the romance at several points in the story, and that's a big win for me. I haven't read anything with this much of a romance bent for a while, so it was kind of nice to shift up my normal dark fantasy slash grimdark reading. If you're looking for that really dark, gritty, grimdark atmosphere, she also pulled that off very well. Hey guys, so it's like 1 in the morning and I'm editing this video and I completely forgot to talk about one of the 2 short stories I read this month, which is not okay because it was really good. And that was Dingo and Sister by Nikki Lee. This is an author who's written some other bigger fantasy books, and I've never read anything by her before, but I picked up Dingo and Sister because I like to get little tastes of a bunch of different authors. Excuse my giant dark eyeballs. This short story follows a girl and her dingo companion in this kind of post-apocalyptic desert situation where they have a unfortunate run-in with a group of travelers and everything goes south very quickly. This is only like 30 pages, but it moves so quickly. We are dropped in medias res into the story and it just goes until the very end. Pretty tense. I thought she did a really good job. She gives just enough world building to make it interesting, but really focuses on the characters through most of it. So that's Dingo and Sister by Nikki Lee. The last fantasy novel that I finished in 2022 was Deathless Beast by my friend Andrew D. Meredith. This is the second book of his that I have read. I did read his other fantasy novel Thrice, which is an adventure, kind of a fantasy adventure story. I'm gonna do my best to be as coherent as possible with this review. I do have a written GOODREADS review down in the comments below of pretty much all these books, so feel free to go read those if you want. Deathless Beast is written in a way that makes you feel like you're sitting around a roaring hearth fire and listening to a master storyteller, and that is something that I do not find in a lot of modern fantasy. I think Andrew does a phenomenal job of taking all of the feel and the tone of classic epic fantasy without making it dense and tropey, if that makes sense. He really makes it his own, and it's one of the most unique fantasy books that I have read this year in the best way possible. Andrew uses this book to delve really heavily into the themes of deeply held beliefs, a religious order, and how that affects the world and the characters, and it's just brilliantly written, to be quite honest. The level of world building detail that Andrew is able to get into this book without info dumping is mind-blowing. I haven't read this level of world building detail and intensity since reading Malazan Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson, but this has a completely different tone than Erickson's work. So overall, just really, really incredible read. If you're the type of person who really loves an incredibly built world, a really beautiful, slow burn storyteller style story, please check out this book because it is quite fabulous, and I am looking forward to reading book 2. The last book that I finished this month is another book that I have been kind of slowly working my way through for the last 2 months, and that is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This is a book that I have been meaning to read for a really long time because my husband had told me that it was a classic that he wanted me to put on my TBR and read and talk about with him. I finally finished Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. It's been on my TBR for a ridiculously long time, and I'm so thrilled to say that I have finally finished this book. I actually listened to this book on audio, which is the first audiobook I've listened to in like all the 3 years I think that I've been on BookTube, at least one that I've finished all the way through. I am not an audiobook listener at all. I really struggle with audiobooks because just the way that my ADD is, if I don't have something to look at to keep my eyes focused, I'm all over the place and I will not retain anything if it's just coming in through audio. So I wanted to commit to trying an audiobook this year. One of the things that I chose to do to kind of help myself get into the audiobook a little bit more is I wanted to find an audiobook with a narrator that I either really loved or was already familiar with. And I was lucky enough to stumble upon the audio version of Wuthering Heights read and performed by Joanne Froggatt, who is Anna in Downton Abbey. I loved her character in the TV show, and when I saw that she had narrated Wuthering Heights, that was an instant choice for me because I knew that if I was going to enjoy this audiobook, Joanne Froggatt was the woman to do it. About this book. Okay, let's talk about the audiobook first. I have a lot of things to say, and I am not going to say a whole lot about what I feel about this book. I'll give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek, but I will be doing a discussion on this book with my friends Evie from the channel She Was Only Evie and my friend Kay from Kay's Hidden Shelf. The three of us will be doing a discussion that will be up on Evie's channel, hopefully within the next few days here. I'm very excited for that because we all come from, I think, very different perspectives on the book, and it's going to be a great discussion. The audiobook, 10 out of 10. Joanne was incredible, and I knew she would be, and I absolutely loved her performance of this book. I cannot say enough. If you're going to listen to this book, I don't have a lot of experience with audiobooks, but I will say that Joanne's performance was top tier. She was brilliant. Absolutely loved it. The writing of this book, beautiful. As far as classics go, it was honestly not as dense as I was expecting, which was kind of nice, and I think the writing style was really captivating and beautiful. It was more within the characters themselves that I started having the problem. I really struggled with how to rate this book, to be honest. I ended up giving it a 3-star, and most of that is because the characters, I understand that there's a lot of themes that are being explored in this book, and I will talk more about that on the discussion with Evie and Kay, but I was so frustrated through so much of this book, and I don't like reading and feeling frustrated the whole time. Like, if there are moments of frustration or a specific character or a couple of characters or whatever that I'm just like really frustrated by in a story, that's fine, that's normal. But when the entire cast is driving me nuts the entire book, you know, like I really was struggling to want to come back to the story and pick it back up. So overall, as far as classics go, I will say that having now read both Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, I will pick Jane Eyre over Wuthering Heights every single day of the week. I enjoyed Jane Eyre so much more than Wuthering Heights, but I can completely see why the people that love Wuthering Heights really love it, and I'm excited to hear more of Evie's perspective because I know that Wuthering Heights is one of her favorite books. So I'm just really looking forward to this discussion. It should be awesome. I will link her channel down below so that once that discussion is up on her channel, you're welcome to go watch it and check it out. That is all of the books that I read in the month of December. Yeah, it was generally a good month. I also binge watched Wednesday Addams on Netflix. It's phenomenal. It has its moments, don't get me wrong. Like, there are definitely some things that I was kind of like, you know, I mean, it's an angsty teenage high school TV show, so there's definitely going to be a lot of that in it. But I really loved the styling. I really loved the concept of the show. I really like the direction that they took with it, and I think that Jenna Ortega's performance as Wednesday was absolutely brilliant. It was so much fun watching her just embody that character and bring a whole new vibe to Wednesday, and that was pretty cool. Highly recommend watching that show if kind of the dark academia cult classic vibes are your thing. I'm trying to think if I've watched anything else recently on Netflix. My husband and I are currently watching the second season of Alice in Borderland, which is a Japanese drama. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Korean show Squid Game, which was huge a couple years ago. Alice in Borderland is basically a similar-esque concept to Squid Game. However, in my opinion, it's better. In a lot of ways, I enjoyed it more. There's a lot of really cool Alice in Wonderland kind of subtle references in the first season. I found that I connected with the characters in Alice in Borderland a lot more. Not that the stakes felt higher, because Squid Game was obviously a giant mess as far as high stakes go. I just cared more, I guess. I mean, there's definitely some adult content in there, so just be aware of that, I guess, going in. I think it's a good alternative to Squid Game, and it's also a good addition to Squid Game. If Squid Game was something that you watched and really enjoyed, definitely check out Alice in Borderland as well. It's kind of like Squid Game meets Lost, if that makes sense. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good way to explain it. That's the general gist of where we are at reading-wise and watching-wise to finish out 2022. I hope you guys had a fantastic reading year in 2022. I hope that you all had a whole bunch of 5-star reads. I hope that you are having a great week, and I will see you in the next video.